The Human Rights Watch has highlighted 3 places that top their long list of concerns in the coming year, and 2 are in Africa: Ethiopia's Tigray region and Sudan. The Advocacy group on Thursday released the annual World Report 2022, and the report itself covers 24 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Human Rights Watch released its annual report chronicling the human rights situations in roughly 100 countries where it works, from Afghanistan right through to Zimbabwe. Human Rights Watch Executive Director Kenneth Roth says that autocracy is ascending and democracy is on the decline. Roth criticized some Western governments for promoting investment deals with and conducting arms sales to countries seen to be violating human rights. He cautioned world leaders for failing to address issues like climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, poverty, as well as racial injustice. Well, for a little more on this report, we're now joined by Carine Kaneza Nantulya, who's the Advocacy Director in the Africa Division of Human Rights Watch. A very good evening to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Great to be with you.
All right. We're grateful for your report, but in many ways it's sad that a report of this nature has to come out and that it describes so many violations in so many countries.
Indeed, but before we get to that, let me first take a moment to just acknowledge the passing of our dear colleague, Dewa Mavinga, who passed away on December 4th. And because our World Report is actually dedicated to his memory. And I know that he was someone you like to invite many times indeed. And as many of your colleagues and listeners know, Dewa was a fierce advocate and human rights activist from Zimbabwe, but his work and advocacy impacted the human rights movement beyond his motherland. So Human Rights Watch would like to just take this moment to just say that we stand in solidarity and our hearts go out to the Southern African human rights community. Now, back to what you just referred to in terms of the bleak, I think, the bleak year for Africa. I think what I would like to highlight is maybe 4 trends that we've seen. The first one is obviously the human rights impact and dimensions of COVID-19. It would be remiss of us not to mention that, against the backdrop of overwhelmed and poorly equipped healthcare systems and inadequately remunerated health workers. We've seen significant rises in COVID-19 cases. And our research underscores how the rising poverty and economic inequalities in countries like Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon have underscored the urgent need for African governments to put in place and expand existing social protection systems to fulfill the rights to social security and adequate standard of living. The second trend I would like to just mention very quickly is really around the political upheavals, which include unconstitutional takeovers. The continent has continued experiencing political and social unrest, where we saw governments using repressive tactics against protesters, critics, activists, dissident voices in countries like Eswatini, Guinea, Nigeria, Sudan, Tanzania, Uganda, Zimbabwe. But it's also important to recognize that you have countries like Niger and Zambia, which oversaw successful leadership transitions as well. We again, talking about military takeovers, we saw 4 coups, twice in Mali, Chad, Guinea, Sudan, and you mentioned our report makes a specific references to Ethiopia, and I think it's important to highlight that over 1 year into the conflict in Tigray, the consequences have been devastating for civilians throughout northern Ethiopia and beyond. And of course, the risk for the broader region, the Horn of Africa region, with Sudan, with the recent resignation of the Prime Minister, Hamdok, cannot be understated. We've seen how government forces and their allies in Ethiopia, including forces from neighboring Eritrea, committed large-scale massacres, widespread sexual violence, forced displacement, indiscriminate shelling, pillage, and attacks on schools and hospitals during the conflict's first 9 months in Tigray. And from July, the conflict spread into other regions, like the Amhara and Afar regions, and Tigrayan forces were also implicated in serious abuses, including summary executions against Amhara civilians and alleged rape cases. The one crucial issue is that for over 6 months now, the government has imposed an effective siege on Tigray, blocking virtually all humanitarian aid from reaching the region and preventing people from accessing food, medicine, etc. Having said that, we are encouraged by the recent decision by the UN Human Rights Council to deploy an international commission of human rights experts on Ethiopia, which could pave the way for accountability. But now it needs to be set up and start its important work. A third trend is really around the protection of civilians during armed conflicts, counterinsurgency operations by government and non-state armed forces in the Sahel, in Mozambique. We've continued to monitor and document ongoing abuses. And the last important thread is really around justice and accountability, where the need for justice and accountability continues to be a recurrent demand in many of the countries we cover. Let me just stop here.
Your director says that a lot of what's going on is as a result of autocracy. Is that something that we're seeing on our continent, sadly? A rise in autocracy and a failure or a falling in democracy? Yes and no. Because, as you know, I mentioned that we've seen, for instance, the resurgence of military coups, right? In other countries, we've seen incumbents clinging to power through the manipulation of their country's constitutions and elections that were neither credible nor fair, such as in Uganda, for instance, and the Republic of Congo. We've seen violent repression against activists, protesters, journalists, as I mentioned, and political opposition in numerous other countries, including Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Eswatini, Rwanda, Senegal. But let me just say that despite this negative trend, there are few glimmers of hope and signals that democracy will prevail in the long term. And I think that's one that's the key message that our executive director also delivered. In Zambia, the incumbent president, who reluctantly relinquished power, due in part to a strong electoral observation mission. Niger saw its first ever democratic transition of power. And it's important to analyze that, to state that much of the repression that we've seen across the continent, and in some cases, these military coups we mentioned, we've seen, have been a direct response to bolder, sustained, audacious demands from African citizens who are insisting up until now that their basic rights be respected. We've seen this through Sudan's brave pro-democracy activists who have proven their resilience. They're still on the street. We've seen this through the work of Congolese whistleblowers and anti-corruption activists who have helped expose how former President Kabila used the presidency and a bank which was run by his brother, and a web of shell companies to amass a fortune, while Congo's population remains one of the poorest, communities in the region. We've seen the resilience of the justice systems in Kenya, Malawi, and South Africa, where former President Zuma is facing corruption and other charges and served jail time for defying the constitutional court's order. We've seen recently the sub-regional body ECOWAS taking bold steps in defense of rights and democracy. And finally, we see younger activists who are increasingly using multifaceted and innovative forms of protest, be it on social media, be it through peaceful demonstration, and art sometimes, and music.
And also, lastly, the importance of Pan-African cross-border solidarity among different youth movements is something to count on.
All right. I mean, rays of hope for sure that you've painted there. You mentioned ECOWAS, which is fascinating to me because Guinea was another country that had a military coup. And I'm surprised that countries like Sudan, countries like Guinea, who've all seen military coups, are not treated in the same way. Your executive director warned the West about perhaps creating an enabling environment for these autocracies and these military juntas. I'm just asking about Africa. Are we not also creating an enabling environment for these human rights abuses because we don't call these countries out when we meet at the African Union, when we meet at ECOWAS, when we meet at these SADC groupings?
Let me just also highlight the fact that the chairperson of ECOWAS has made a bid to do away with what we call the third termism, which was a bold step and needs to be encouraged. I agree. The African Union, being obviously an intergovernmental institution made of 55 heads of state who more often than not call and claim that the principle of sovereignty is very important and should not be infringed upon. These are the challenges we have to work through. We are faced with on a daily basis. However, I think the African Union, as we move along, will have to contend with a stronger citizenry voice. We see in our advocacy, when we do advocacy on the region, increasing number of regional groups that are challenging the status quo. We would like to see, and we've called upon the African Union, especially some of its policy organs, such as the Department on Political Affairs, Peace and Security, to take bolder actions. The other thing I would like to say is that the African Union is obviously not a homogeneous entity. Within the Union, you also have regional human rights institutions like the African Court on Human and People's Rights, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And these institutions and others have been able to create a body of work and precedents that we need to build upon. They need to be encouraged. They need political support from AU member states. But their work is also, it needs to be recognized and validated by organizations across the board.
All right, perhaps in closing, and I'm hoping that you'll give me some hope here. This is the 32nd annual report. And what I'm hoping is that whilst we report on all of these cases, that the general trend over time has been one of improvement in terms of human rights records on our continent. Please tell me that that is the case.
It's not going to be an easy answer. What I can say is that and I think I mentioned it earlier, I think what we see a more sophisticated and ruthless response in some parts on the continent, because on the other side, there is a more sophisticated and more resilient action from civil society organizations. We believe that there is always hope. Otherwise, we would not be doing the work we do. We believe that autocrats today on the continent are fearful, and that's why they are using more repressive tactics than they used to maybe 10 years ago. But at the same time, let's remember that 7 citizens out of 10, according to an analysis that was issued by Afrobarometer, prefers democratic governance to any other type of governance. And I think that is something to stay with and to remember.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it. Thank you so, so much. And I believe that this report is available on your website and that people can download it and read it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Right. And I would invite everyone to indeed get on our website and read the 764-page report.
Thank you so, so much.